Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are jumping into something that is highly specific and honestly pretty intense.
Yeah, it really is.
But before we crack open today's source material, do me a huge favor. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. It is the best way to keep these deep dives coming your way.
Absolutely. You definitely want to be subscribed for this one.
So today we are reviewing an ebook called Facts Offend Women. They Prefer Lies and Plausible Deniability, written by Conrad Riker.
It is quite a title.
It is, and we should state right up front, this book is explicitly written for an audience of men's rights activists and, men who align with the red pill perspective.
Right, men who generally feel that the current social system is heavily rigged against them.
Exactly. Riker describes his work as an ultra-long, incisive, and fascinating field manual for the modern man. And his main thesis is basically about understanding the history of our institutions, education, law, the corporate workplace before they were captured by feminists and Marxists.
That is the core of his argument, yes. He is laying out a case that these institutions didn't just drift, but were actively captured.
Now, as always, we are here to impartially break down the author's arguments. We are just the messengers unpacking what is in the text. But if you want to see all his data, the charts, the actual manual, you need to go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books right now to buy the ebook yourself.
Yeah, we're going to cover a lot of ground today, but the book goes into massive detail. It really is meant to be a comprehensive guide.
All right, let's get into it. Our mission today is to unpack Riker's claims on biology, the legal system, and what he calls the war on masculinity. And he starts with a concept he calls the reality warp.
The reality warp, yeah.
Why does the book claim that facts just don't stick to women the same way they do to men?
So Riker bases this on a concept he terms emotional alchemy.
Emotional alchemy.
Right. His thesis is that the female brain, and he leans heavily on evolutionary psychology here, prioritizes emotional consistency and social safety over objective, cold truth.
Okay, so how does that actually play out?
Well, the book claims that when a woman is presented with conflicting information, it triggers a fear response. So instead of engaging with the data logically, she relies on what society now calls her truth.
Ah, right, we hear that phrase a lot.
Exactly. And Riker argues that her truth is basically a biological defense mechanism. It allows a subjective feeling to override objective facts.
And he uses a recurring example in the book to illustrate this, right? A hypothetical guy named Mike.
Yes, Mike. We follow Mike's life to see how these theories apply. The most prominent example is Mike in family court during a divorce.
Walk us through that.
So Mike is the classic provider. He works long hours, pays the mortgage, does everything society asks of him. But in court, according to Riker's framing, the objective fact of his financial provision doesn't matter. What matters is his wife's subjective feeling.
Like if she says she felt neglected.
Or unsafe. That is the big one. Riker argues that in a captured legal system, her feeling of unsafety is treated as literal evidence of his danger. The emotion transmutes reality. That is the reality warp.
That sounds like a tough situation to navigate. But Riker doesn't just blame the courts. He points to the biological blueprints chapter.
He does. He completely rejects the blank slate theory, the idea that men and women are only different because of socialization.
And he brings in some intense historical stats here. The 4% rule.
Yeah, the ancestral reproduction data. Riker cites studies suggesting that historically about 40% of women successfully reproduced, compared to a tiny fraction of men.
He mentions the Genghis Khan era specifically, right?
Right, where during certain genetic bottlenecks, maybe only 4% of men passed on their genes.
So the argument is that throughout human history, being a man was essentially a winner-take-all scenario.
Exactly. Riker says this is why men are biologically wired for extreme risk-taking and aggression. The penalty for failure was total genetic extinction. Women, on the other hand, were wired to seek safety and consensus because they had a different survival path.
So testosterone built civilization through risk, and estrogen seeks safety.
That is how the book frames it, yes. And Riker argues that modern society is trying to treat male biology like a disease.
He brings up that Swedish preschool experiment to prove this.
Oh, the gender-neutral schools, yes.
Right, where they banned traditional gendered toys.
They tried to force a totally neutral environment, and the book notes that it was a failed experiment. The moment the teachers weren't looking, the boys were turning sticks into weapons, and the girls were wrapping the sticks in blankets like babies.
Biology wins out.
According to Riker, absolutely.
Yeah.
You can't just socialize away millions of years of evolution.
Which leads into what he calls the matriarchy paradox, the idea of having power without responsibility.
Yes, and this connects directly to his concept of the glass cellar in the workplace.
Explain the glass cellar. We always hear about the glass ceiling.
Right. The glass ceiling focuses on lack of female CEOs in air-conditioned offices. Riker says we need to look at the glass cellar. He pulls OSHA data showing that men make up 93% of workplace fatalities.
93%.
Yes. Men are the ones on the oil rigs, the deep-sea fishing boats, the power lines. They do the dangerous, dirty jobs that keep civilization running,
So society relies completely on male sacrifice and aggression.
but then demonizes those exact same traits when men return to polite society. Riker argues that men are demanded to be disposable for the greater good, but are simultaneously told their natural masculinity is toxic.
That is a fascinating paradox. Let's shift gears to his history of institutions, because that is a huge part of the text. How does the book argue the legal and corporate systems were captured?
Let's start with the legal firewalls, specifically family court. The bias there, according to the author, is systemic.
He drops some heavy stats here from the Census Bureau.
He claims that men pay 97% of alimony,
97%.
and in contested custody cases, men lose 85 to 90% of the time.
That is overwhelming.
Riker uses this to illustrate the double bind of toxic masculinity. If a man is strong and assertive, he is labeled toxic and dangerous to the family. But if he is vulnerable and weak, he is despised and loses respect.
There is an anecdote in the book about this, a guy who sent a text message.
The Goodnight Princess text. Yes.
Mm.
During a custody dispute, a father texted his daughter, Goodnight Princess. The mother showed this to the court, claimed it was creepy, and said it made her feel harassed.
And the court sided with the feeling.
Exactly. Because of the reality warp, the objective reality of a loving text was legally transformed into harassment based entirely on her emotional interpretation. The man actually faced jail time.
Wow. Okay, so that is the legal side. What about the corporate world? He talks about woke warfare.
This is where Riker targets diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, or DEI and ESG scores.
How does he frame DEI?
He doesn't see it as a push for fairness.
Sure.
The book claims these are tools of ideological colonization. They are mechanisms designed to enforce conformity and specifically to strip competent, aggressive men of their careers.
He brings up the Google memo here, right?
James Delmore, yes. A software engineer who cited peer-reviewed biological data to suggest why there might be fewer female engineers. He prioritized data over emotional safety.
And he was fired.
Fired almost immediately. Riker uses this to highlight what he calls the masculinity trap in corporate HR departments.
The masculinity trap.
Right. If a man shows vulnerability at work, say he breaks down crying in a high-pressure meeting, he is penalized and viewed as weak. But if a woman does the same thing, she is celebrated for being authentic.
It's a lose-lose scenario for the men in those environments.
According to the author, yes. The institutions are captured to operate entirely on a feminine emotional framework.
Let's go back a step. Before Mike gets to the corporate world or family court, he has to go through school. Riker calls this the education counterstrike.
This is where he argues the indoctrination starts, the pathologizing of boyhood.
He talks about the medication rates for ADHD, right? Boys compared to girls.
It is drastically higher for boys. Riker claims that natural male behaviors, competitiveness, high physical energy, aggression, are no longer accommodated. They are diagnosed as medical conditions.
Because the schools have shifted their focus.
Yes, from a competitive model, which boys into excelling, to a collaborative model. Riker argues this collaborative approach heavily favors female socialization styles and disadvantages male learning.
This reminds me of the Volcano Project story from the text.
That perfectly illustrates his point. A young boy builds a working volcano. It uses chemicals, it's messy, it actually erupts. It's functional engineering.
And what happens?
He gets a lower grade than a girl who brings in a static, glittery, papier-mâché mountain.
Because the girl's project was neater.
Exactly. Riker says the grading rubrics now punish masculine energy and reward, following instructions and aesthetic presentation. The boy learns his natural instincts are wrong.
And the book goes even further when discussing gender ideology in schools.
That is a very dark chapter for Riker. He uses the dragon gender custody case.
Dragon gender.
A father actually lost custody of his child because he refused to affirm the child's fantasy that they were a dragon or a different gender. Riker uses this to argue that the state is overstepping parental rights to enforce an ideological narrative over biological reality.
So the system is actively working against the father's rational view.
That is the assertion.
Okay, so Mike survives school, gets into the real world, and tries to date. This brings us to a huge part of the red pill discussion, the sexual marketplace.
The dating minefields. This is where Riker really digs into the data on hypergamy.
Hypergamy being the tendency for women to date across and up social and economic hierarchies.
Right. And he pulls Tinder statistics to show how ruthless this has become in the modern era.
What were the stats he cited? It was incredibly skewed.
The claim in the book is that women on dating apps only swipe right on the top 4.5 to 15% of men.
While men are swiping right on what, over 50%?
Easily 50% or more. This creates what Riker calls the 80-20 rule, though he argues it is shifting closer to 90-10.
So if you are just an average guy, you are mathematically invisible in the modern dating market.
Invisible. And this leads to what the author calls the nice guy trap. Society tells men that women want emotionally available, vulnerable, nice guys. But Riker argues that biology dictates women actually choose dominant, high-status providers, the classic Chad archetype,
So men are told to act one way, but are selected for a completely different set of traits.
which creates a massive cognitive dissonance. Riker connects this to the provider paradox. Women want traditional provision. They want the house, the resources, the safety, but they also demand modern independence.
He calls it the Disneyland dad trap, right?
Yes, you are expected to be the stable, boring ATM machine providing safety, but she is biologically attracted to the exciting, dangerous bad boy. It is a lose-lose for the rational man.
Wow. Okay, so listening to all this, it paints a very grim picture of society for men. But Riker doesn't just leave it there. Segment 5 of the book is called the Playbook.
Right. It is a manual. He offers solutions for the rational man. Self-defense strategies.
So what are the practical steps he advises for men's rights activists and the manosphere?
He breaks it down into a few categories. The first is financial freedom. Riker explicitly advises against traditional financial setups because of the gyno economy.
The gyno economy, meaning the wealth transfer through family courts.
Exactly. To protect against that, he suggests complex structures, using LLCs, offshore trusts, and heavily utilizing cryptocurrency, specifically Monero.
Why Monero?
Because it's a privacy coin. It shields your assets from being easily tracked and seized by divorce courts. He advises making yourself a financial ghost to the captured system.
That is intense. And then he talks about legal protection. Operation Porcupine.
The goal of Operation Porcupine is to make yourself too prickly to touch, too difficult to sue.
How does a guy actually do that?
By recording every single interaction. Riker tells his readers to use body cams, dash cams, and phone recording apps constantly.
Just going through daily life, recording everything.
Yes, because if you are operating in a reality warp where her feelings equal facts, your only defense against a false accusation is raw, undeniable video evidence.
Which protects you from the Goodnight Princess scenarios.
Exactly. Then there is the physical aspect. Body armor.
Getting in the gym.
Lifting heavy weights, fixing your posture, and actively trying to look dangerous. Riker argues that society preys on weak-looking men. By commanding physical dominance, you force a baseline of respect and deter institutional bullying.
Okay, so you have your money hidden, you are recording everything, and you are physically imposing. What about mental health?
This is perhaps his most controversial point. Brotherhood reforged. He explicitly tells men to reject modern therapy.
Reject therapy entirely.
Yes. He argues that therapy is a feminized institution designed to make men compliant and docile. Instead, he advocates for tribal male groups.
Like support groups.
No, he calls them accountability engines. A support group validates your feelings. An accountability engine challenges you to be stronger.
He talks about building a mental fortress.
Right. The idea is to stoic up. Riker says men must rebuild the fraternal order completely outside of these captured institutions. You don't try to fix the system. You build a parallel structure with other rational men.
So summarizing this deep dive into facts offend women, this book is fundamentally challenging the modern narrative. It is offering a hardcore red pill perspective on the state of men today.
It is definitely not pulling any punches. The author is presenting a worldview where you have to take extreme ownership and defensive measures just to survive.
And as we always do, we want to leave you with a final provocative thought based on the text.
Think about this. Riker's entire premise is that civilization was built by men embracing extreme risk and necessary aggression. If our modern institutions successfully suppress and pathologize those exact traits, does society continue to progress, or does it eventually crumble from the inside?
That is a question you will be chewing on for a while. And look, we only scratched the surface of the charts, the legal history, and the specific strategies in the playbook.
The book is ultra long and fascinating. If you want the full picture, you really need to read the source material.
Go to Amazon Kindle or Google Playbooks right now and buy Facts Offend Women by Conrad Riker.
And if you want to keep up with the author and get more of his insights, you should absolutely follow him. He is at Conrad and Riker at Substack.
All right, that is going to do it for us today. Make sure you hit like, subscribe to the channel, and stay rational. We will see you on the next deep dive.